Welcome to the Weights and Plates podcast. I am Robert Santana. I am your host, joined by Andy Baker for part 2 from our last episode, this time on video.
Oh, did the last one wind up being only audio?
Yeah. We just released the audio because my video was shit and you were having lighting issues. So people liked it.
That was the most chaotic attempt at filming a podcast in history. So I literally had guys in my kitchen, like the day that we needed to record, like with a jackhammer, like pulling up tile. So I had to go sit out in my truck to film. That was the only place without the jackhammer sound out in the driveway. And there was like no light. It was getting dark. So by the end of the podcast,
I couldn't see you. Yeah.
It was just like little, just shadows, just a voice coming out of the darkness. So, hopefully this one will be better.
I hope so. So where we left off last time, we kind of went through your beginnings, talked about novice training, and then started talking about more intermediate, advanced stuff, diet. And I kind of wanted to pick up there because that's what kind of prompted us to go into this. We were talking about rows and, broadly speaking, assistance exercises because we get a lot of questions about this. Everybody wants to start there. There's a big problem with people wanting to major in the minors.
Yeah.
So just to kind of rehash. So we get a novice. We run them through starting strength or some version of that with the basic barbell lifts. They make linear progress, get their newbie gains for those of you who haven't been listening for a long time. And then things get a little bit more complicated, but not a lot more. And we start talking about adding exercises to address various weaknesses or to direct training in a different direction, depending on what the person's doing. As you wrote in the book with Rip, once you are no longer a novice, you have a decision to make. And I think I want to start there.
Yeah. Well, it's just about, it's like, I always use the analogy about like education. It's like, it's almost like higher education. Like at the beginning, everybody has to learn the basics. It's like, you got to learn to like read, write, and do arithmetic before you can move on to anything else, and that's kind of the novice. That's kind of the novice phase that's kind of our reading, writing, and arithmetic phase. And we want to get you really, really, really good at those before we move on to other things. But as you advance through the training or through your education, then, just doing the squat, the bench press, the deadlift, the overhead press, and pull-ups is a good, it's really the perfect foundation for both strength and size and just technical ability. If you can master those lifts, you can, it's going to transfer to just about everything else that you're going to do. They're not overly technical, but they do have some technical skills. So you're kind of learning, apart from building muscle and gaining strength, you're also learning just some body awareness type issues and that sort of thing that, that just transferred it to anything else even outside of the gym, but also transfer to other movements in the gym. And so, once you've kind of mastered that scene, you've got that really good foundation in place, hopefully, and you don't want to let those go. You don't want to lose your base of what you've built, but also just putting those lifts on repeat forever is usually not the best strategy. I mean, there's a multitude of reasons why you're just going to get stuck. That physically, mentally, and some guy, that's a big one too, is the psychological need for a little bit of change. And that varies by the person. I mean, you get engineering types, they're perfectly happy to just keep the same 4 or 5 exercises in a program forever with just simple manipulations of sets and reps. And for a lot of people that can work, especially if you work with somebody that knows how to program. You can manipulate volume, intensity, frequency, and all that on it. Just a small handful of basic exercises and get a lot out of it. But some people are just going to want a little bit more variety in their program. They're going to want to explore new exercises. They're going to and they're going to the other part of that is it can be more effective to have a little bit more variety, like actually more effective, not just because you want it to, but having that additional variety in the program can be more effective. It can kind of satisfy kind of the boredom aspect of it. But I also think it goes a long way towards injury prevention as well. I do think that the best analogy I've ever heard is like, if it's the same reason like we rotate our tires on a car, or if all you did on your car was just take left-hand turns all the time. like your tires would wear in the same spot. And so having a little bit of variety in the program with a different exercise selection across the week and not just doing the same lifts, especially the same lifts hard and heavy, is going to go a long way kind of towards mitigating some of the, especially those just overuse type injuries, that you get with just doing the same stuff over and over again. But what happens is after the novice phase, back to your kind of original question, which is you have to decide what is the direction of your training, because at the beginning it's just to, basically increase basic strength and build a good foundation of muscle mass. Mm-hmm. And then after that, how do you want to specialize, or generally, how do you want to go? Are you training for sports? Are you using the gym in order to transfer to some other outside activity that has its own set of physical demands and is a drain on recovery and that sort of thing? It's very different working with an athlete who's got to balance the training with the actual practice and play of their sport versus a power lifter whose sport is the lifting, and so all of their time and energy and recovery assets and all that can go towards their in-gym activities. And there's not much to do outside of the gym. So, are you training for sport? Are you training in order to do a strength-based competition, powerlifting, weightlifting, strongman? Kind of a corollary to that would be bodybuilding. A little different. It's not as performance-based as the other one, so I'd almost put that in a separate category. But those are kind of the big four that we normally talk about in terms of the strength sports. Do you actually want to do that and compete? Or are you training just for, like our buddy Michael Wolf says, are you just a dedicated recreational lifter? You don't really want to compete, but you're also not just in it to just maintain and feel better. And you want to get strong. You want to move your deadlift from 405 to 500 just for the sake of doing it.
That would be me.
And that's a lot of who we work with, especially my online clients. That's probably the bulk of who I work with, is people who care about it. They want to get as big and strong as possible, but they're not really competitive in that. And then you have a certain other subset of the population. And this is more of we were just talking about this kind of off air, which is like the difference between in-person and online clients. Like a lot of my in-person clients are more like health and fitness based. Like they're not, like I had a client tell me a long time ago, and this has resonated with me as like how to program and how to manage the training for a lot of my in-person clients, which is, I don't really care how strong I am. I just don't want to be weak. Right. So they're not like dead set on, I got to move my squat from 315 to 405. They just want to be strong. They want to be healthy and they want to be fit, but they're not that obsessive about the numbers or their physique or, anything really highly specific. So those are kind of those are kind of the four categories I put people in, whether there's, and so you have to kind of, as a coach and as the athlete or the person under the bar, they have to kind of decide what direction you want to take your training and then establish an appropriate programming strategy for that. And then, like you said, at the novice phase, it's kind of all the same, because whether you want to be an engineer or a doctor or a lawyer, at the beginning of your education, you're all going to start in the same place. You all got to read, write, do math, cover the basics. And then at a certain point, even in your undergraduate degree, you're all still doing a lot of the same stuff, right? Which is kind of, that's like the early intermediate phase, which is you're all still doing a lot of the same stuff. You're all still squatting and deadlifting and benching and all that kind of stuff. But then as you get a little further along in your undergrad and your master's and all that, you start to really, you start to do a little less focus on some of the basics and start to expand more into the area of specialty. And then by the time you're a PhD or whatever, to keep on this kind of silly analogy, is you become, entirely focused with just that one area and really in a highly individualized way to bring up your specific weak points and your needs as a competitive power lifter or as a competitive bodybuilder. You may follow radically different programming than somebody else. Somebody like me who's a good bench presser but a terrible deadlifter, relatively speaking, as a power lifter, my programming might look very different than a guy who's, 6 inches taller than me and whose arms are as long as I am tall, right? Who struggles on the bench, but can deadlift, all day long, and is really suited and built for the lifts. His programming might look radically different from mine. Because we have different needs as athletes in different areas where we need to focus, but you see that in bodybuilding all the time at the advanced level. Most guys that are competitors have a couple of genetically gifted body parts where they don't necessarily have to train those as hard or as often as, say another body part, which is really, really hard to respond. Pretty much any competitive bodybuilder will tell you that they have one or two of each of those. And so the programming at that level is going to be highly specialized and highly individualized for that athlete, where at the lower levels, it's going to look more kind of the same for everybody.
Right. So you raise an interesting point. Like you said, many in-person clients, they're more on the health and fitness side, or what I like to call the looks side, right? They want to lift to achieve a certain look. And for many years, like you and I have discussed in the past, so yeah, we have this dichotomy now in the industry between strength and hypertrophy. And I want to dive into this with you because you talk about it quite a bit. I talk about it quite a bit, a little bit differently. But a lot of these guys that are consuming content, and back in the day, all we had were bodybuilding magazines or spin-offs of them, like the Men's Health, Men's Fitness. It was some spin-off of bodybuilding. Right. Because the message that is sent is, well, they train to look a specific way. But that's not necessarily the specific way that most personal training clients seek to look. When we're talking about bodybuilding, we are talking about a level of muscularity that most people aren't interested in achieving and can't achieve realistically. Right. And they also forget that there are other variables that influence the way a muscle looks. Like you said, limb length is one. Insertions is another one. Angle of pennation, the number of muscle fibers.
Body fat level.
Body fat level, skin thickness. Rip used a word that I'm stealing from his article on it. Gracile knees and elbows. I never heard that word before.
Does that just mean thin?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, look at Ronnie Coleman's waist.
Yeah.
For how big he is. He has like a 27-inch waist or something. That is,
oh yeah.
The bone structure is perfect. So if you, like you said, if you one of these guys with big kind of thick knees, like just bone structure knees, that versus a guy who's got little tiny knees, how much that little thin knee joint and elbow joint is going to make your quad look that much bigger. It's going to make that actual, that meat over the top of the quad is going to look so much bigger when you've got a really narrow joint.
Absolutely. And the biggest one is the number of muscle fibers you have. So far as we know, and I think I'm on board with this theory, we only enlarge what we have. We don't add more in terms of muscle mass.
Right.
Nobody's really disputing that. It looks rather obvious.
Right.
So that's probably the biggest limiting factor in terms of training. And then you factor in the drug use, which I don't say that negatively. That's part of the sport because anabolic steroids and testosterone and testosterone analogs or anabolic steroids are a stimulus for growth, and people forget this. And I recently reshared that old 1996 article. I shit on academia a lot in this show, but there's some things that kind of check out past the smell test. This is one of them. They put these guys on high-dose testosterone, and they define that as 600 milligrams per week, which is triple the high end of TRT.
Right.
And the guys who took test gained more muscle mass, and the guys who strength trained did not take test. Obviously, the guys who did both gained the most. Right. But this highlights my point. The drugs alone are a stimulus for growth.
Right.
So the problem is, and our boy Dante Trudell talks about this, there are guys that hop on rather quickly, get results, attribute those results to their training, and then start dishing out advice that ends up hurting people. Remember that long thread he posted about that?
Yes.
And this has been the thing I've been ranting about for years, because you get guys that come to you and they're like, I want to do hypertrophy because so-and-so, who's on a bunch of gear and has been on a bunch of gear for years, said you have to do a million different exercises, which kind of brings us full circle to where we're at. Number one, these same people that say these things also acknowledge that you gain most of the muscle mass you will ever gain in the first couple of years.
Yeah.
They say that, they start citing fat-free mass index, all this shit, right? And I would agree with that. That's been my experience. The first couple years were the fastest, and then it's very slow and steady.
But as an add-on to that, and you may get to that, but I want to say it because you'll forget, because it's very, very relevant to the guys that we train. Mm-hmm. And this is one of those things, unfortunately, you can't do anything about. When you talk about the first couple years of training, it also matters when those are.
Yes.
Because unfortunately, if you miss that window of late teens, early to mid 20s, and you don't start lifting until you're 35, you're not going to get the same. It's not just that you miss 10 to 15 years of training. It's that your ability to grow is more when you're teens and 20s than it is. And if you don't start lifting till your 40s, you're never going to hit what you could have hit had you started when you were 16. And so there's nothing you can do about it. You start when you start. But if you start as a teenager in early 20s and you have good training at that time and you put on a lot of size during that time, you're going to be able to put on more than if you don't start till you're 35 or 40. So it matters when you start. And like I said, that's just an unfortunate dose of reality, because I think you and I both probably work with a lot of the same types of people who come to us as novices, intermediates that are in their 30s and 40s,
Absolutely.
And so you have to manage expectations about what is possible.
So it's interesting you bring that up, because I have been talking about this quite a bit. Eventually, aging becomes a limiting factor. And when I explain to people how, okay, if you started out with, let's say, let me back up. I tell people all the time that baseline muscle mass is highly predictive of where you're going to end up, assuming you don't take any drugs. And this just baffles people. So I'm like, if you start with 125 pounds of adult muscle, you're post-puberty, because I see these fucking ex-bodybuilders and influencers are like, look at my before picture. I was skinny at 14, and now I'm 205 and ripped. And I'm like, dude, you were also going through puberty. That's a variable as well. You were growing no matter what. Kind of like
you would have been 195 even if you hadn't lifted.
Yeah. Puberty is a stimulus for growth. Who do we know that doesn't take steroids that grows without training? Teenage boys, right? The growth is happening regardless. So assuming you are 18 to 25, we'll say that's a good window to start. You don't have those effects playing a role anymore at this point as a male. And you start training, let's say you gain. So I like this old article that Lyle McDonald wrote where he was talking about how much muscle can you hypothetically gain over a lifetime. Do you remember that one?
I've read just about everything Lyle's written. Yeah.
So he was talking about,
crazy as he is, big fan.
Dude, he's like the Ripito of bodybuilding, man. So fucking autistic.
I know. But turns out to be right on basically everything.
Dude, he's always fucking right on this shit. So I read this article and he's like, we don't know the exact answer, but if we look at this, logically, he's like, if you have a year of serious training and you're a young man and you've never done it before, you might gain 15 to 25 pounds of muscle, with the genetic outliers gaining the 25, the guys who are naturally built for it, right? And then he started like tapering that number down. He's like, in year 2, it might be like 10 to 15. Then year 3, it might be 5 to 10. Then it becomes immeasurable. And he kind of came up with this 40-pound number. But then he kept putting in italics, serious training. That means uninterrupted. You're progressively overloading. You're PRing every year, for lack of an alternative metric. But he said most people aren't seriously training for 4 consecutive years, 5 consecutive years.
Yeah, because that was when you were telling the story. That's what's going through my head. You have to factor in like gains lost during the course of every year. Oh, I was sick. Oh, I took a 2-week vacation. Oh, I had to stop because of the
Yep.
And so like those little periods of like detraining and atrophy that occur to like almost everybody, like you said, that because they're not actually training hard, let's say 50 weeks out of the year,
So I've kind of leaned on this theory of his, and I agree with it. I think 40 is probably reasonable for somebody with good genetics who trains hard and does it for a while. So then you start doing the math, right? So I'm like, okay, if you start at 18, let's say you gain the 20 the first year, then you gain another 15 the second year, you're at 35, right? Then you might gain another 5. So now you're at 40 to 45. And then it becomes immeasurable. And you see it with guys that compete in bodybuilding, natural bodybuilding. Yeah. You see this huge change. Like, look at Lane Norton, for instance. He's a good one. He claims he's drug-free. I think I believe him. But you look at him back in like 2001 or 1999, whenever he did his first competition, he was already a muscular dude. By 2005, he was pretty jacked, and from then to now, his body hasn't changed that much from his fifth or sixth year of training. And that's when he introduced powerlifting exercises, squats and deadlifts. So that's a good example. You look at that. 2001, when he started out and he wasn't really doing squats, he was still muscular. And then he got really muscular by 2005. And then from 05 to 15, yes, he was bigger, but not that much bigger.
Right, yeah. Everything just starts to level off.
Exactly. So then you consider that, right? So you put in 5 years, you've gained pretty much most of what you're going to gain. Then you gain fractions. Well, you start doing the math, then you're getting older, right? So you have age slowing you down.
Right.
The math doesn't add up to where you can gain 60 or 70 pounds of muscle if you're a skinny guy with 125 pounds of lean mass at baseline. You're not going to be 200 pounds and jacked. It's just it's not going to fucking happen, you know?
Yeah.
And it just blows these guys' mind. Then they hear these bodybuilders telling them, oh, you need to do all these exercises, you need to focus on the stretch and stretch mediated hypertrophy and lengthen partials and all these little things that, you know, we can both agree they work, but how are we defining work, right?
Yes.
Like if you make a muscle work harder, no matter if it's a single joint exercise or a compound exercise, it's going to grow. But to what extent, right? Like a squat will go up for years. So this is because I'm always pushing back on bodybuilders about the press because they claim that, oh, the press only works front delts. It's only good for function, transfer to function. And they will cite the EMG shit. They'll say, well, you're not getting a lot of muscle activation in your lateral delt, you know, your side delt. You need to do lateral raises. Well, I was the guy who did every type of fucking lateral raise known to man. Then I found RIP. At that point, I'd started overhead work a year before. And that was the first time I saw that shit fill out. So then I started thinking about this. This kind of reminds me of the old fat burning zone with aerobic work where they're like, you know, if you do low intensity, you're burning more fat. Well, the ratio of fat, yes.
But less calories.
Less calories, right? So I think it's the same kind of analogy, right? Like side delt's not contributing much to a press, but which lift is going to get overloaded for a longer period of time?
Yes, and that's the big thing that Dante was pushing, Dante Trudell was pushing like back in the 90s because everything was so oriented towards just get the pump, get blood into the muscle.
And it's back to that now. It's back to that now.
It is. Yeah. And, you know, what his thing was what really moves the needle, you know, in terms of adding muscle and strength. And it is, you know, what lifts can you do or what movements can you do that can be progressively overloaded basically to infinity. You know, there's theoretically, now there is an upper limit, but theoretically there is no upper limit to what you can overhead press, bench press, deadlift, squat. You know, there's other exercises that fit the bill that are more bodybuilding specific. I mean, I'd put leg presses and hack squats and that kind of stuff.
Of course.
Basically overloaded to infinity, but those would have fit his criteria for a bodybuilder, where that's where you're getting your main juice from. And it's like, not that you shouldn't necessarily, if you're a bodybuilder or really want to maximize everything, that you shouldn't do, you know, cable press downs or some of these other types of movements, but that if that's the only thing in your program and that's where your focus and your your intensiveness, your intensity lies, you're going to get so I mean, his message is so simple. Obviously a lot of the specifics are different, but his kind of macro message is so similar to like what we preach. And like he would have said, like, what's really going to move the needle, like what, you know, take your squat from 225 to 315. Take for whatever rep range, call it 5, call it 10, doesn't really matter. I mean, it does and it doesn't, but in kind of the grander scheme of the argument, whatever your metric is, whether it's a 5 rep set or a 10 rep set or whatever, you know, take it from 225 to 315 to 365 to whatever. And you can do that with weighted dips. You can do that with a close grip bench press. You can do that with some of these other movements that guys don't really want to do. Overhead presses versus cable laterals. It's like, not that those things have zero value, but they're not going to move the needle as much, especially for a guy that's still in that, like that mass building phase. Still is in that realm where he needs to put on 20 pounds, 30 pounds or whatever. That's only going to come from overloading those compound exercises that can be loaded to infinity. Everything else is kind of icing on the cake. Like, it works.
It's the last 3 to 5%. That's how I like to describe it.
But it's those things that can really be progressively overloaded for long periods of time. And the heavy compounds are what do it. And that was the message he was been preaching for years. And, and he had a system for doing that also used the drugs to push those.
Yes.
But that was his whole thing was you look at dog crap training, which was his methodology, which is, he said his hardest thing was getting these guys that needed to grow that weren't growing, is getting them into the gym and getting them to strip out like 80% of what they were doing, and basically just focusing on a routine not for the rest of their career, but for a win, like kind of like our novice program. Yeah. I wouldn't define dog crap as novice training, but no. It's almost like introductory training for a more advanced athlete. Mm-hmm. It's like intro to advanced training almost would be a good description of kind of dog crap training. But that was his thing, was that like, we're not going to do 3 or 4 exercises for chest today. We're going to do one and then do it again, like Friday, do it Monday, then do it on Friday. And the whole goal is to take your bench press from 315 for a set of 5 to 365 for a set of 5 in as short a time as possible. And if you do that, you will have grown. I tell guys this all the time, and I've said it on podcasts before, like if you squat 315 for 5 today, and a year from now, you squat 315 for 5, and that's your legitimate max. It doesn't matter about your volume. It doesn't matter about your frequency. It doesn't matter about length and partials or blood flow restriction or whatever other little thing you want to. If none of that has produced the ability for you to improve on that 315 for a set of 5, you will not have grown. It doesn't matter if you squat once a week or 3 times a week, or if you did assistance work or if you didn't. If the limit of your abilities is 315 for 5 today, and a year from now, the limit of your abilities is still 315 for a set of 5, it's highly unlikely that you will have grown. Now, then you say, okay, so the goal has got to be and I'm just using 5 as an example. I'm not married to that for hypertrophy, but it's good. No. It's a good range. But for the larger,
what's that? For the bigger exercises, this is what I've concluded, and I think you have too. I think 5 to 8 is great.
Yeah.
Once it gets past that, there's an endurance component and things start to break down. But yeah, so I always tell people, I'm like, the 5s, because of what we're doing, the squats, the deadlifts, the bench presses, the presses. Yes. But the more isolated the movement, then yes, the reps need to go up, obviously.
Right. Yeah. And I think, and I think that's just, there's a lot coming back to that now in the hypertrophy world of talking. You'll see a lot of content on that now about the 4 to 6 rep range being superior. I remember like Star's original 5x5, and actually, what was the guy's name that had the 5x5 before him? Was
Reg Park.
What's that?
Reg Park.
Well, there was even going back before, Mark Berry, maybe.
Oh, okay.
Was it like going back to the 30s?
Because Arnold got it from Reg Park, and I don't know where he
got it. And lots of guys have used it like back in the day, but like in Star's book, he talks about some of the some of the research that came like from the Soviets, like the Eastern Bloc countries and stuff, that researched this, really heavily, 40, 50, 60 years ago, that, the optimal amount of volume for strength and size was 4 to 6 sets of 4 to 6 reps. Well, he was like, well, okay, so the average of that's 5 sets of 5. and I can sell the shit out of that in a program because people like that nice, clean. Part of the 5x5 lore is it's so nice and clean, right?
Yeah.
It's not 4 sets of 6 to 8 reps. It's 5x5, right? So there's a marketability to 5x5 training, but the reality is that it works, and you're seeing a lot of the hypertrophy type influencers or whatever coming back to, well, we need to do more 4 to 6 rep training because that's where all the growth occurs. Is that everything else that you would do, and I tend to agree with this, in a 12 rep set is only there to get to those last 4 to 5 reps, right? So it's only reps number 9, 10, 11, and 12 that are actually doing anything. So the first 8 are just to set up the fatigue to get to reps 9, 10, 11, and 12, assuming that 12 reps is maximal. That's the Beardsley's effective reps theory, which I tend to agree with. I don't think it's bulletproof, but I think it's good. I think it does explain a lot. I think it explains why higher rep training, 10 to 15 rep training, basically has to be taken to failure to be effective. whereas 5-rep training does not have to be taken to limit failure to be effective for muscle growth, because at those loads, basically you're already at max motor unit recruitment. When your set is already at 80-85% of 1-rep max, you're basically at mostly or full motor unit recruitment from rep 1 of that set. So all 5 of those reps in a heavy set of 5 are maximally stimulative. Whereas in a 12-rep set, you're not at full motor unit recruitment until maybe rep 9. And who's to say even then if you really are, but it's really those last, and it goes back to that kind of the cliched stuff of, it's the last rep is the one that counts. Well, that's actually quite true in hypertrophy training. If you're going to train with higher reps, then failure is really necessary. A 12-rep set with 4 reps in reserve, I don't think it moves the needle. I think higher rep training. And so, but going back to the single joint versus compound and rep ranges and all that, I think the 4 to 6 rep range stuff that's kind of coming back is very much in line with what we would say about 5-rep training being extremely effective. And going back, to some of the Soviet crap that came out, would say is very effective. But there's a practical issue with isolation exercises being loaded strictly in the 4 to 6 rep range. It could be a safety thing. It could be a joint integrity thing. It can be how do you progress a leg extension done for sets of 4? When you put another pin on the stack next week, you're going to be at 2. So using a broader amount of rep range for isolation movements, whereas, a bench press or a squat, as you and I know, if you microload, you can do 5 reps today, add 5 pounds, do 5 reps next week, add 5 pounds. You can stay at 5 reps or let's just say 4 to 6 for argument's sake, and progressively overload that 4 to 6 rep range on a compound movement for long periods of time without having to adjust anything. You can't do that on isolation movements. If I'm doing 4-rep dumbbell curls today, and that's my limit, if I go up 5 pounds on that dumbbell curl, I'm going to be at 1.5, 2 reps next week. And the third week I'm at 0. So in order to have any sort of progression on those isolation movements, you have to start at a higher rep, or at least implement higher rep ranges so that you can have some reps, some stimulative reps in your training, or else. So I'm not against doing the occasional really heavy leg extension as long as it's in good form, or really heavy barbell curl as long as it's in good form, or whatever, for those really, really low rep ranges. It's a problem of, 1, it can be safety. 2, it can be just progressibility. There's no ability to progress over any long period of time a 4-rep leg extension. Now you can start with 100 pounds for 15 reps on a leg extension, take it to failure and add weight every week until you hit 6, and then restart back over at 15 and keep doing little cycles like that. That works extremely well as a programming strategy for isolation movements. And it's fine because 15 rep isolation movements don't have the same fatigue level as 15 rep squats do, and I'm not opposed to doing that kind of stuff either from time to time. But it's as the core of your training, it's very, very difficult to do that. It is very fatigue producing, and you probably are wasting a lot of effort in order to get to those final reps where you could just do the equivalent of those final reps and probably better if you just did a heavier weight for less reps. And I think we did touch on in the last podcast about rep ranges and steroid use. And there are reasons why. It's not that all these guys are stupid and they don't know that a 5-rep squat might be better than a 15-rep squat for whatever reason. There's still some thinking out there, right, wrong, or otherwise, that, higher reps for legs are better. That's always been there, that type of thing. And is that just swelling and sarcoplasmic hypertrophy and edema and all that kind of stuff from the higher reps, or is it really producing more growth? Whatever. That's a separate topic. But there is a safety concern for guys that are using really high levels of anabolics to not go really deep into those low rep ranges with really heavy weights, because they will get injured because of tendon ruptures, because the tendons don't keep pace with the strength of the muscle. Right. The muscle strength, the force production capacity of the muscle is increasing a lot week to week when you're on heavy gear use. The integrity of the tendon is not. And so you can exceed the force, the muscle's ability to produce force can exceed the tendon's ability to keep that muscle attached to the bone. And that is more pronounced on a heavy set of 3 or 5 reps than it is on a set of 12 to 15 reps. So there are legitimate reasons for, say, a pro bodybuilder to not go deep, and especially in a pre-contest scenario where their carbs are low and all that kind of stuff. They're more dried out. They're more susceptible to injury. They're doing a ton of cardio, all that kind of stuff. It's not the best, maybe the safest blend of things to do. So, that is a legitimate issue for people to think about. If you go back to Dante's training, with the dog crap training, he did, like I said, his training methodology with the DC training was not independent of drug use. It was designed to what he called blast and cruise.
I remember that.
The DC training was meant to be in conjunction with a blast, which meant to really overload the body with a shitload of drugs. So these guys are going to take a bunch of drugs and then they're going to train really, really, really hard and I don't know, it was 6, 8 or 12 weeks or something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
But they're going to really push their ability to load these exercises. But if you look at the rep ranges that Dante prescribed for those guys, it was fairly high rep training, more so than what it wasn't.
Yes.
It wasn't heavy 3 rep squats and all that. It was 10 to 15 rep leg presses and that kind of stuff, but still with a focus on progressive overload, but at a higher rep range. And I think part of that was a safety. Dante's not stupid, and he's very educated on both the training and the gear use side of things. And so I think the training methodology was meant to be run in conjunction. These really, really, really aggressive runs at progressive overload with the drug use, and then a cruising phase where you pulled the drugs back, lower the weights or lower the effort level, and kind of cruise, allowed your body to recover or whatever it needs to do around super high drug use, and then run another blast again. And so I think like his methodology still works independent of drug use, but the exact way that he did it was, Lyle's a big DC fan. Lyle does a lot of dog crap training. I've done a lot of dog crap type, never that exact program, but a lot of the rest pause sets and the focus on lower volumes at higher effort levels, especially if you're not a guy that wants to do a lot of volume and you want shorter, more high intensity workouts. There's a lot of good stuff to draw from Dante's work over the last 20, 30 years.
It's funny. He wrote that, what was it, Cycling for Pennies? The board post back in 2003, I think.
Yeah.
And then in the 2010s, powerlifting got popular, CrossFit got popular, and people were lifting heavier. And it kind of just disappeared. And then now the old stupid shit of lots of exercises, lots of volume is back.
It's all back.
Now he's peeked his head back into the social media sphere. He said he won't do podcasts. He responds to me, and we talked a couple times. He won't do podcasts or anything like that. But he just sees the same stupid shit recycling, and it just prompts him to remind people of some of these lessons. But,
he's said his piece though. He's just not going to get on there and say the same. And he makes money from his supplement company and all that. So he's not an influencer, in the fitness world, but he's very influential.
Yes.
So.
It's interesting because we still run into this problem of these. Who was saying this recently? It might have been Dorian Yates. Just shitty low-carb bodybuilders dishing out advice. And then when you look at the top guys like Dorian, Arnold, Ronnie, even Cutler, all of them were strong. All of them would gain lots of weight. All of them would hit the compounds heavy. None of them were fucking weak,
Right.
And when you're when a guy like that is sitting there saying, okay, you really shouldn't do, heavy sets of 5 on the squat. Well, for that guy, it's 600, 700, 500. These guys are strong fucking squatters. And they're also dealing with problems that most of the clientele that consume this information are never going to deal with. Oh, my core fails before my quads. The skinny fat guy that hires you or me, and he's in his first couple years of serious training, even 3-4 years of serious training, never going to take anabolics. He's not going to run into that problem. His quads are going to grow just fine from squatting, because even though it's contributing less to a squat than a leg extension, it's contributing, and you're overloading. It's contributing more. That quadricep is producing more force, even if it's 30% of the lift, right? It's producing more.
That is a huge point that I think has been missed in this idea now, where it's gone back to this idea of total isolation.
Yes.
And you see a lot of the people that are pushing this content now is every exercise for every muscle, the muscle has to be completely isolated. It has to be completely stabilized, or it's ineffective or whatever. But that's something to look at, like what you just said. Like, yeah, a quad, but just because the quad is working in conjunction with the hamstrings and the glutes and the adductors or whatever in a squat, it's still probably producing more force than it would be in certain single joint movements or whatever.
And then more next week.
Not all really strong. So even though the quad's doing 100% of the work in a leg extension and the quad's doing 40% of the work or whatever in a squat, it's that 40% may outweigh the 100% that it's doing in the other. I don't know that for sure.
What we do know is that next week it's going to produce more force than this week.
Yes, and that's the other thing, is that because it's not working in isolation. It goes back to Dante's point, which is that it has that ability to be, in theory, progressively overloaded to infinity, which certain isolation movements don't have. You know, some have more capacity than others. They're not all the same.
Sure.
But you know, it's you don't want to get carried away with everything has to be worked strictly in isolation in order to grow. You know, the heavy compounds have a lot. And also too, like, just from a practicality standpoint of programming, and he talked a lot about this, and I've talked a ton about this, which is using your exercise selection in order to bump up your frequency. In other words, people may look like, I basically train like one body part per day. And I'll just use myself as an example. And I do like between 5 and 6 days a week, sometimes 4. But I like that style of training. I like shorter, more intense at this point in my career. It's not how I always trained, but it's how I like to train now. But I also, so somebody could look at my routine on paper. If they just looked at my split and they'd say, well, he only trains shoulders once a week. Like, how is he going to grow from that? But that's not really true if you look at the way that I do my exercise selection, because I start every chest workout with incline press. You know, and so that's twice a week right there, because all of what your EMG studies will show, the front delta is activated just as much in an incline as it is on a strict overhead press. And so you're getting, you know, if I do, I may only do chest once a week, but I always include stuff in my arm day, my tricep stuff. I'm always doing weighted dips. There's 2 right there. Like, so you can bump up the frequency of the muscles that are trained to 2, 3, or even 4 times a week with your exercise selection when you're using those compound movements. Yeah, if your chest workout was nothing but pec deck flies and, you know, cable flies, then but most people don't train that way. Most of your big bodybuilders have never trained that way. So even when they're at a, like, say, a once a week frequency, they're not really, you know. I would argue my triceps get worked 4 times a week, you know, even though I only train them directly once a week. But I have a day where I just do biceps and triceps, super short workout, usually on Friday, super short workout. And
I took that from you. I started doing that.
Yeah. And so I don't need a lot. I mean, I'm not a bodybuilder, but if I was, my arms would have the best genetics for growth. So I don't need to hit them, you know, directly 3 times a week or whatever. I don't think that really works out well anyway, but anyway, that's aside. But, you know, when I do chest on a Monday, there's triceps in there. When I do back on Tuesday, it's not a lot of tricep stimulus, but there's some proximal stimulus when you do chins or pullovers or things like that. You know, if the triceps are really, really sore and you go do a back workout, you will feel them in your, not just on the stretch, you'll feel them on the contraction. There is some tricep activation when you perform movements that have shoulder extension, which is going to be all of your lat movements have some degree. Well, all of your lat movements have shoulder extension.
Long head.
So but that's a secondary role of the tricep. I mean, that's its proximal role, is to contribute to shoulder extension. When I do shoulders and I do shoulder presses or whatever, triceps get stimulated a little bit again. I'd argue it's probably, for where I'm at now, that secondary stimulus that I get on my triceps from benching and shoulder pressing is probably not enough to elicit growth. Like, because it is a secondary stimulus, it's not the primary mover. And I think that becomes necessary, you know, but for a novice, that kind of the secondary stimulus that you get is enough to elicit growth. So the secondary effect that you get on the bench press is enough to make the triceps grow. For a more advanced guy, it's really not. Like, when he does a chest workout, his chest is going to get growth from that. The secondary effect on, let's say, the delts, the triceps, is enough to kind of prevent any sort of atrophying or whatever between extended periods of time of not training it. And that's the other thing now, right? That we're in this like weird frequency thing. Like you have to train a muscle every 48 hours because it's going to, it starts to atrophy. After the training session, then you've got basically a 48-hour window where you're recovering and growing. And then then atrophy starts to set in. And so guys are like, oh my God, I have to train every muscle every 48 hours or it's going to shrink. And it's like, no, for one, I think the spike that you get in muscle protein synthesis outweighs the drop off. So, you go, let's just say you go up 2, but down 1, because plenty of guys have grown training a muscle once a week.
Of course.
I mean, it's silly to think that every muscle has to be trained every 48 hours, but you can through good selection of your exercises, through doing a lot of these compound movements that train lots of muscle mass together. If you are worried about that, you are absolutely going to prevent any sort of atrophy in your triceps, say when you're benching or shoulder pressing. It may not grow them if you're a more advanced lifter and you've already got a lot of muscle. You're not maybe going to get a ton of growth from bench pressing on your triceps. You may need more direct work in order to make them actually grow when you're trying to get that last little bit of growth in. But it's certainly going to preserve the muscle mass for that week in between training sessions, let's say. And so, doing a split where you're only training each muscle group, once a week, if you're using intelligent exercise selection, but everybody it's like nobody just goes in and does leg extensions for their quad workout. No, like you're squatting and leg pressing or, those types of movements, when you go and when I do I'll do a workout. I do 2 lower body days a week. One's quad focused and one's hamstring focused, but there's stimulus in both of those workouts for both. Plus when I do my heavy stiff leg deadlifts or RDLs, I'm getting oftentimes my lats get sore from those. My traps get sore from those. So there's a ton of secondary effect if all I did was go in and just do leg curls, then there's not a ton of carryover to the rest of my body. But with those bigger movements, you're creating a pretty broad stimulus at every session.
So you reminded me of something when I followed one of your So you reminded me of something when I followed one of your templates. It was an arm program. There were shrugs in there, and I haven't touched shrugs in 20 years, maybe. It's been a long time. But, I did exactly what you wrote because that's kind of how I approach things. And I adjust it as as things start to unfold, I adjust it, like some, joint pain, et cetera, That's what happens. You start with a template, then you conform it to the lifter. And I did that for myself. But I'm like, I don't want to do the shrugs, but I'll do the shrugs. I'll do everything you put in there. And the grip work was great, by the way. Yeah. But all of a sudden, like my girlfriend at the time, she's like, your traps are growing. And then I started paying attention. And I'm like, oh, yeah, no, they work. Most of my trap growth has come from deadlifts. But then I look at it, to your point, when we use the word growth, like when you and I are using it in our situations, we're talking about a small amount of growth, absolutely speaking, right? We're not talking about I'm going to put 6 inches on my traps and have no neck from doing shrugs, when I've already been deadlifting for 15, 20 years, Right. So that was interesting that happened because I wasn't trying to grow traps. I was just trying to do the program, and I was just doing shrugs and then making them heavier, then started using the straps and making them even heavier, and the traps grew. But we're talking about less than 5% growth probably if you were to measure it,
but if you want to maximize stuff, like guys come to me all the time and they're like, well, I can't get this to grow. And it's like, well, have you tried training it?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like if you're just like you said, like I can't get this muscle group to grow, but then you look at the program and there's like no direct training for that, and I think in large, like a lot of people, like, because we've talked about it before, and sometimes we don't always caveat stuff like as well as we should, like what audience this particular soundbite or this particular piece of information applies to. I'm real bad about that because I talk to everybody. Like I train novices, more intermediates, I train more advanced people, I do the strength stuff, I do the physique stuff. I'm very much like a guy that has my finger in lots of different little places, and I'm not always great about reminding my audience who I'm talking to. And so like guys will add, like a client will see a piece of content I put out. I'm like, hey, when are we going to start doing that? And I'm like, well, you never, because that was not for you. Like, but a lot of people, they don't have, I feel like if you're more educated on the stuff, like, and you have more experience, you can kind of, when you hear a piece of content, like, you know who that information applies to and who it doesn't. You can kind of piece that out, like, oh, that's for this population,
Yep.
that's for but doesn't apply to this. And a lot of people, they hear stuff and they think, well, that applies to everybody. But I think a lot of people have a misconception that because in the beginning, when you start with a program like Starting Strength, that is just doing the compounds, the same 4 or 5 exercises, and that everything does grow, more or less, that if they just keep doing that and keep adding weight to that everything will keep growing in the kind of the same proportions, and eventually that levels off. So it somewhat contradicts what I was just saying about, progressively overloading the compounds. I think that is always definitely in the beginning phases of programming, like that's really the only thing that matters. It still matters 10 years in, 5 years in, 20 years in, but it becomes less and less of that kind of global stimulus. And you do need direct work on basically any area that you're concerned about. So, at the beginning, guys will just, bench and press and do chins, and their arms are going to get bigger. But there's not a single bodybuilder in the world, natural or enhanced, or a guy with gigantic arms that only does bench, overhead, and chins, and unless he's got just world-class genetics. And I would consider, like, for arms, for me to have really good genetics for arm growth, but I also train them, like, hard. Like, I don't care. Like, barbell curls are a better bicep exercise than chin-ups. They just
I would
are.
agree. I want to dive into that, but I agree.
They just are. Like, you have to train the movements that you want to get bigger. I mean, that seems like the most basic statement anybody can make, that you have to train the muscle directly for it to grow. But a lot of people miss that. And some people go too far, like we were just talking about, where it's isolation only and too many sets and too much frequency. But the other side of that spectrum is that some people have this kind of misconception that you can just do this handful of basic movements forever and never change anything, never add anything to it. Dante's more intermediate and advanced programs are not the same as the dog crap program that he's famous for. That's his beginner program. But again, his beginner is different than our beginner.
Yes.
His beginner is 240 pounds in the off season that needs to go to 280.
That's a contest bodybuilder.
Right.
Yeah.
That's not our beginner. So his, like I said, but he has like a beginner and intermediate and advanced programming that he uses. It's just his beginner program would be like kind of where our late intermediate and advanced guys would start, if that makes sense.
Because his beginner has an adapted nervous system, has built adequate amounts of muscle at that point, and is now anabolics on top of it.
Yes. So
that is not somebody who's been fucking around in the gym, not really using a barbell, or never lifted before at all.
His intermediate and advanced programs do add exercises, but because that global stimulus that he talks about at the beginning of just, hey, for triceps, we're not doing cable extensions and all that. We're going to close grip and do weighted dips. We're going to do one on Monday and one on Friday, and we're going to keep doing those until you can close grip 365 for a set of 8, and you can weighted dip with a 100-pound dumbbell around your waist. And then we're going to start adding cable press downs and, lying triceps and all that kind of stuff. I add them in sooner because I'm not doing the blast cycles that he is. So I actually need that stuff a little earlier to maximize growth. But the key is that you really want an adequate dose of both long term. You need to really to really maximize growth. You need an adequate you never leave the basics behind. But you don't just stay with the basics forever. Again, it goes back to that education. You never, no matter what your discipline, you never stop reading, writing, and doing basic math.
Right.
Ever.
No.
And the better you are at those things, the better you'll be at the faster you can read, the better you can write, the quicker you can do math in your head, the better scientist you're going to be, the better lawyer you're going to be, the better whatever you're going to, so you never leave the foundations. but the foundations aren't enough to take people to where they want to go. You have to add on to that, but you don't need to add on into excess, and especially leaving the foundational movements behind, or do so much that you can no longer progress the foundational movements because there's such an interference effect from all this other shit that you're doing.
Yeah. So a couple things. So in starting strength and in practical programming, it is mentioned that most people are novices. And what Rip means by that is most people haven't adapted to a lifting stimulus long enough to be considered an intermediate or advanced lifter for various reasons. You know, they move like shit. They don't have training drive. They don't know that they need to add. They've done inferior programs, or they get sick. They travel. You know, they can't keep a schedule. There's a lot of reasons that people don't get to a point where they have a lot of these problems. And I like that you mentioned earlier, sometimes you have the problem of not saying who things are for. And I think that's just industry wide, because this industry used to just appeal to like serious lifters. Like my friend, has a weightlifting club that he runs out of my gym. And he always says, he's like, if we trained at a gym like 30 years ago, everybody's a lifer, you know?
Yeah.
And now that's not the case. And that's, been changing since the early 2000s and 90s. More, I guess, normies have been getting into the weight room and trying to do things. And when they consume content, they're getting it from guys that are like hardcore about it, you know?
Yeah.
And then when they hear I need to do a 6-second tempo on a bicep preacher curl to get growth, they think they're going to add 4 inches to their biceps doing that when they can't do a chin up yet.
Yeah.
And I have to always remind them that the guy saying that has a lot of neuromuscular efficiency, is very strong, and all these things that we've been talking about thus far. So to kind of bring it back to the next point I wanted to hit, the phrase train upper body like a bodybuilder, lower body like a power lifter has been circulating around lately. I've been hearing that more. And this has kind of been my experience to an extent. I found that now when I say growth, I'm pretty satisfied with any amount of growth. I'm not trying to get on stage and get every little fiber of my thigh to pop out. You know, when bodybuilders are talking about growth, they are trying to impress a judge, and they want finer details of their body.
Which is why they have to do leg extensions, because they have to develop the rectus femoris.
Yes, exactly.
Which is best stimulated with a leg extension, not a squat or a leg press. And so that a leg extension for a competitive on-stage high-level bodybuilder is a foundational, almost non-negotiable piece of the thing, where it is not. I like leg extensions, but I would not classify them as necessary for your recreational athlete.
Right. So your normie that just wants to look good on the beach, you know, he's not looking for that kind of growth. You know, he wants his thighs to look like they do something, and squats typically do that, and they do it for a long time. They're still doing it for me.
Right.
Now, upper body, I was always bottom heavy. I rode bikes a lot when I was a kid, rollerbladed, used my lower body a lot. I was always weaker up top. And when I started pressing, that took care of the shoulders. When I started deadlifting, my whole back grew.
Yeah.
And then I found that my hands are weak and I'm not strong at curling type motions. Like, despite all the stuff I was doing with the squats, the presses, the deadlifts, the chin-ups, I still struggle to carry groceries long distances or hold boxes in this position. You know, my elbow's bent. So recently, I don't know how it happened. I think when I did starting strength, there was always like a press bias, probably because Rip's shoulders are fucked up, so you bitch about the bench, and somehow we all kind of fell into this press bias. And I just kind of did it. I went through the motions. I pressed twice a week. I benched once or twice a week, and then my bench just kind of stagnated. You know, I did it a lot when I was younger, and and I think this was a net positive because my rotator cuffs caught up. You know, my shoulders got stronger. So I think what I did was probably smart, because I did do a lot of benching, even though the programming wasn't ideal before. Well, in the last few years, when I started your ARM program, I got into more benching, right? So I did a lot more benching. And I realized that first of all, the strength doesn't really go up unless I do it 4 times a week, you know, for whatever reason. So I started doing that, and I started alternating the variants. So a close grip one day, a pause one day, a regular one day, an incline one day, because I care about that. Recently started messing with decline. So I started thinking about this. I'm like, okay, my arms are growing because the triceps are 75% of your arms. So I thought that was cool. But I'm like, where I'm weak is in elbow flexion, you know? So how do I approach this? So I would say that I am closer to novice in those movements than advanced, because I kind of neglected that. I don't curl. I never really curled consistently. I had strong chin-ups because I used to swim. So that just kind of stayed. And I'm like, you know, I haven't trained my overhead pulling probably since I was a young kid. So I'm going to approach this the same way. I'm going to do 4 shoulder extension variants a week, and I'm going to curl like how you taught in that program, do a 4 to 6 sets once a week, of some sort of bicep curl. And then I thought about it some more, and I'm like, okay, this is a contest lift. This curl could be pushed heavy if they're maxing it out with their back against the wall. So I'm going to curl every other week and dumbbell curl every other week. And then I'm going to try and add weight to that. So I'm kind of doing the basic intermediate type program for the bicep curl. Meanwhile, I'm doing one heavy chin-up a week, basically a Texas method type deal. One heavy chin-up a week, one back offset on the pull-down, which now has turned into a chin-up because it's gotten heavier.
Yeah.
Then on the other days, I'm doing a prone grip pull-down, a V-grip pull-down, and then I'm doing a row, which is a partial, if you kind of think of it that way. And a few things happened. I started getting stronger at these lifts. And the way that I'm measuring that is I get on the scale with the weight belt on before I add the plates, and then I try to incrementally load that. And lo and behold, my grip's stronger, my biceps have gotten bigger, etc. And I'm still doing a handful of exercises, but again, I'm not trying to get my brachialis to pop through the skin on stage so I impress a bodybuilding judge. I just want my arms to grow a fucking inch,
Right.
And I've accomplished that through a lot of benching and a lot of chin-ups. Now, if I was a bodybuilder, now I'd have to start thinking about, okay, what part of my bicep isn't showing? And guys, when we're talking about this, we're talking about fractions of an inch here, dude. These guys have 20-inch arms, and they're adding exercises to bring a fraction of an inch of that arm to show on stage. They're not adding 3, 4, 5 inches to their arms.
No, the basic meat is already there. It's things when you add a certain, that's the old debate about regional hypertrophy. Can you influence a part of a muscle by by training it at a certain angle? Can you influence the lower head of the bicep, let's say, for instance, by training it at a certain angle versus another angle? Does regional hypertrophy exist? I think it probably does, but like you said, it's such a small, how could it not?
Of course.
For one thing, like when you change the exercise and you get radically sore in a different spot, on that muscle, that I've always said soreness is not a goal of a training program, but it is a really useful indicator.
It's an indicator. Yeah.
It's an indicator of stimulus. And it can be a really good indicator of, did I train the right muscle or not? The same thing with a pump. It's not, I don't really believe that the pump itself is the causative factor to growth, but it is the best indicator probably of correct exercise execution, of who's going to get bigger. The guy that does 10 reps on a lat pull down and comes off and goes, and I go, can you feel that in your lats? And he goes, oh, no, not really. Or the guy that comes off the lat pull down and is like, fuck, my lats fucking hurt. Like they're fucking, like they're blowing up. Like they're coming out of his shirt. Like he's got such an insane pump in that area. Like who's going to grow more over the long term? The guy that can't feel his lats work at all in the lat pull down, or the guy that gets like an insane mind-blowing pump from that exercise because he has very, very good mind-muscle connection to that. Now, does the pump itself, does the muscle being engorged with blood and having all the metabolic kind of waste products in the bloodstream, all that, is that in and of itself causing the growth? No, but the fact that blood is in the area that he wants to work, and there's like metabolites floating in the bloodstream that burn, is an indicator that those muscle fibers just did a whole shitload of work. So the pump is an indicator of effective training technique. And if you train a muscle and you cannot get a pump in that muscle, there's some caveats to that.
I like that. It's an indicator of technique.
It is. And that's why it's important, and that's why that's in especially for bodybuilding type of training, getting a slight pump in your warm-up sets is crucial because it allows you to refine your technique through a handful of lighter warm-up sets until you've got it fine-tuned to where, okay, so I'll give a good example of one that's really hard to get people to do, but it's actually fairly important for us. It's critically important for a bodybuilder, and this, again, it goes back to this idea of kind of regional hypertrophy, is lower lat development. Okay. And one of the better exercises for that is like a close grip pull down, like a V grip pull down, or like a close mag grip pull down. Yep. And not leaning back and turning it into a row and not pulling to the upper chest, but pulling down here to the mid chest and flexing the shit out of your lats at the
Oh
bottom.
shit, I'm gonna start doing that.
Yeah, if you can do that, you can generate a massive pump in your lower. I bring clients into the gym sometimes and I show them that technique of how to do that. And they're like, I didn't even know that's where my lats inserted. Like, I didn't know I had lats way down there. They've never felt them until they've done that movement. But once you do a couple of light warm-up sets and you generate that massive pump, okay, now I've got the technique down that's going to engorge those muscles with blood and make them do the work. Now I'll go ahead and load it for, a handful of work sets. Who's going to get more growth out of that movement? It's the guy that knows how to do that movement to blow that muscle up. And I guarantee there's not a single pro on stage who doesn't know how to do that.
No.
And they all know how to do it. They can all get an insane pump from every exercise that they do. They all talk about it. There's not a single bodybuilder that you've ever talked about who has ever not. Now, a lot of them, like you said, they misattribute the pump is the only thing that matters. You just get a pump in the muscle and it will grow. I think a lot of guys don't get the fact that it is an indicator and not causative. But it's not an unimportant thing. And I think for guys nowadays to throw that out the window as something that just because it's been shown to not, it's been shown that there is no correlation between the buildup of metabolites in the bloodstream that cause that muscle burn or the engorging of the muscle with blood. There's no direct link causing those two. And that's where the pump comes from. It comes from both of those things. There's no link that shows causation there, but any effective exercise technique is going to, and it's the same thing with soreness. Soreness in and of itself, it's like severe muscle damage on the tissue. That in and of itself is not it's not like, okay, the more sore I get, the more growth I'm going to get. Obviously not. And there's ways that you can make somebody really, really sore with very ineffective training techniques.
Yes.
You can emphasize the eccentric or, there's all kinds of things you can do, but soreness again is an indicator of growth, or an indicator of effective exercise execution. And the type of training that you do that is going to cause hypertrophy, that's going to be stimulative enough to make a muscle grow, is also going to cause muscle damage. Mm-hmm. Like the two they're co-travel. You shouldn't seek out muscle damage and soreness, but the two things they're co-travelers. You cannot. It's very difficult to get a really effective hypertrophy stimulus without causing muscle damage. Mm-hmm. And so there's going to be some soreness. I've never known anybody that had gigantic any body part where that body part wasn't routinely sore. Not so sore that they couldn't walk for a week. But right. I don't know. I've never met a single bodybuilder who didn't have leg soreness the next day.
Well, dude, on a much smaller scale, every time I squat, my adductors are sore.
Yeah.
And it was kind of funny because the first time I cut after doing starting strength and kind of training this way, I'm like, man, why do I still got fat in my inner thigh? And I'm like, oh shit, wait, that's like rock solid. It's not fat.
Yeah.
I just wasn't used to that. I was used to, being like fat from when I'd bulk up. And then first time I cut down, I'm like, man, I'm like $165 because my upper body training wasn't great at the time. And I'm looking down there and I'm like, what the fuck is it? Then I'm like, oh shit, that's muscle.
Yeah, you got adductors now.
And it's they're routinely fucking sore. My hamstrings are routinely sore when I deadlift.
Yeah.
If I front squat, my VM, my vastus medialis gets sore because I can get
deeper.
I
mean, so it's an indicator of where where does an exercise hit you, and again, it can be an indicator of where to. It's like the age-old question in bodybuilding: are deadlifts a leg exercise or a back exercise? Guys have debated about that for years. Do I put deadlifts on leg day or back day? Because they both get a ton of stimulus.
Right.
I'd argue if you do a ton of them, where are you the most sore the next day? Are you the most sore in your hamstrings and your glutes the next day? Or is it your erectors and your traps and your mid back? Is that the most sore?
I can't answer that. Dude, they're all fucked up the next day.
Yeah. Well, I kind of agree. They're all pretty sore, but depending on your build, you're going to have a certain level of stimulus that's maybe a little bit different for the next guy. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like with a lot of different exercises, it's kind of where is your pump at? Where's your soreness level at? And that can be an indicator of whether or not that movement is an effective stimulus for that muscle group.
So let's talk about rows. What kind of sparked all this?
Okay.
What was I going to say? Oh, so as you're talking about this, I'm thinking about rows. So I recently, because of the way I designed my program, I wanted 1 row a week. So 3 full range of motion overhead pulls, 1 partial. And I forgot why I defaulted to the chest supported row, the one where you're completely upright and you're on an incline. So there's no hip flexion whatsoever. You're not bent at all. And after a few weeks of doing that, I was using the Arsenal chest supported row. I guess, would that be considered a machine because it's plate loaded? Yeah, so plate loaded.
Yeah, it's a machine.
Yeah, the plate loaded Arsenal chest supported row. So you're completely horizontal, no hip flexion. As it got heavier and heavier, then I started feeling all these weird fucking muscles way down near my lumbar. Not quite that low, but like right above. I'm like, shit, I've not been using all my erectors. And now when I deadlift, I don't feel like I have to fight as hard to set up. It's kind of interesting. But the thing that and you can clarify this because people are always asking about rows, how strict, how not strict. You and I have talked about this. And, it really depends on the purpose. When it comes to Olympic lifts, the way that I've been teaching them lately is I explain to people, I'm like, you're hoisting a weight up, essentially, which I consider to be functional. So I've been teaching more novices how to clean for that purpose so they can learn how to hoist up weight. You can do that with a row, too. It's very frowned upon with the bodybuilders. They say any movement of the hips is bad. And, I agree in one context and another, not so much. But a novice shouldn't be doing a barbell row anyways. We talked about this, right?
Yeah, I don't know if we got to that or not. But
you brought it up briefly in the last one. I think you did. I feel like I heard you say it recently talking to me, so I think it was the last one. But the reason that I like doing rows is because, like I said, I'm weak in elbow flexion, and my experience with them has been the first thing that goes is your hands, and then the arms tend to fail before the back because it's a partial, right? Right. So I get all these questions about how strict should it be. I guess how strict should it be? What are you doing it for? I have my ideas. I want to hear yours because you talk about this exercise quite a bit.
I think pretty strict. For the muscle to grow.
What are we trying to grow?
You have to have a target for an exercise. When you're talking about hypertrophy.
Yes.
You have to have a target muscle. So when you're talking about strength training, it's a little different. Yes. If I'm training a power lifter, I don't necessarily care whether he's more pec dominant or tricep dominant or which exercise, do the triceps get more of a share of the lift or the pecs get more of a share of the lift. We're going to set him up in a way to where he can bench press the most weight. Okay. So where his leverage is set for his body type, whatever, we're going to set his grip, his arch in his back, his touch point for that barbell. All of those things are going to be manipulated so that he can lift the most weight. And that will be demonstrated in the gym. You're going to be able to see what technique is the strongest. The same thing for a deadlift. Whether, if he's a competitive a competitive power lifter, I don't necessarily like on stance width and where the barbell sits on the back. It's going to be what is the technique that allows you to lift the most weight under contest rules. That's it doesn't matter whether you're more quad dominant or glute dominant or whatever dominant. Same thing with sumo versus conventional. The object is to lift the most weight under the rules of that federation. Absolutely. So whether it's sumo, conventional, stance width, none of that matters. We're not trying to target a muscle group. I'm not concerned of whether X muscle does more work than B muscle, or A muscle does more work than B muscle. In hypertrophy training, though, that matters. So you have to, when you're doing a hypertrophy lift with the goal of stimulating growth, you have to say, which muscle am I targeting? Right. Or even to get even more granular, what part of the muscle am I targeting? I would say that's a non-issue for most people. Let's just go back to what muscle am I targeting? Yes. Well, that muscle, two things. It needs to be doing the bulk of the work, 80, 90% of the work. Without contribution from other muscles that are, let's say, irrelevant to that lift. Right. And by and large, it needs to be the failure point. It needs to be the thing that fails, because if we agree that training closer to failure is where maximum growth, where the growth stimulus occurs, the signal that goes to your brain and tells it to remodel that tissue bigger and stronger than it was before happens when specific muscle fibers reach a very slow contractile velocity. Specific muscle fibers.
Right.
Okay? Not the movement itself. This is a big thing when people understand what we're talking about.
Yes.
When we're talking about tension, you have to understand the difference between tension at like the muscular skeletal level tension versus tension within specific muscle fibers themselves. The contractile velocity of those muscle fibers of the target, they have to reach a near 0 point. That's failure. That's where the stimulus for growth lies. We used to think it was different. And we've all said this at some point in our past, that muscle growth was stimulated basically by muscle damage. Break the muscle down and it will regrow bigger and stronger than it was before. And I think that's where a lot of the older training methodologies, a lot of the super high volume approaches came from, where it was that point of let's just make the muscle sore as shit, throw a ton of volume at it, throw a ton of exercise at it, because we're just trying to break down those muscle fibers and do as much damage as possible, and then let the body will repair the damaged muscle fibers and the muscle will be bigger and stronger than it was before.
Yes.
I think what we know now is that is not the exact mechanism by which growth occurs, and that it is more of a signaling mechanism than it is a repair of muscular damage. And it's what Rip talks about in the very first day of the sliding filament theory between the actin and myosin fibers and the cross bridging and all that shit that happens. And that when that process happens, which only happens at a slow contractile velocity, so the weight has to reach near failure so it has to be light and trained to failure or very heavy from the get-go. Both of those cause what? A slow contractile speed of those muscle fibers. Eventually so slow that it fails or reaches a velocity of 0.
Yes.
Right? Okay. So, but that has to happen in the target fibers of the muscle that you're trying to train. So that's the argument against, say, low bar squatting. If the quad, it's not like there's zero growth, but if you're trying to maximize things, in a low bar squat, are the quads the point of failure?
Typically not.
Or is it,
Typically not.
Yeah, no, I would argue typically not. It's going to be probably the adductors. They receive probably the most stimulus. But something in there, it's harder to ascertain on a big compound.
Exactly.
It's very hard to ascertain. It doesn't mean that they don't have value. I think that they do.
What I've noticed with the low bar squat, because I've exclusively trained it for years, just because I'm not a bodybuilder, I like it, I'm used to it. Sometimes I'll switch it up in high bar. It's just I like doing it. I'm not so biased against it where I'm going to say that it does things it doesn't do. That's just what I do. And what I've noticed is the vastus lateralis and the vastus intermedius and the gracilis, they have gotten more developed. The medialis, not so much, because I need to get deeper for that.
Right.
That's been my but I have normal anthropometry though, so
this is what I'm talking about. Is my argument that I'm using is most of what I don't look at all the papers. I read other people who look at all the papers.
Same.
And I find somebody who I think has the right analytical approach that can blend the interpretation of those papers with practical application. So I'm not the science guy. I'm not trained in reading research papers and all that kind of stuff. I don't care to be honest.
I am, and I don't care.
I have bought into Beardsley's. People should go look up Chris Beardsley. He has a great Instagram account, and his kind of effective reps theory, which is basically that any set that has the capacity to stimulate hypertrophy has about 5 effective reps in that set. There's about 5 reps where the contractile velocity is slow enough to signal a hypertrophic response. And so a limit set of 5 is there. You're at full motor unit recruitment because basically what he'll tell you is that basically around 8, it probably varies with your absolute strength, but around 80 to 85% of 1RM, you're at full motor unit recruitment from rep 1. Even though you're still 4 reps from failure, The
And
weight
you
is heavy
feel
enough.
that too.
Yeah, the weight is heavy enough, though, that it is stimulative from rep 1. And so by the time you get to rep 5, it's, you can't get rep 6. All 5 of those reps were maximally stimulative, or close or very close to it. Whereas go back to our example, if you do a max effort set of 12, it's only those last, say, 5 reps, assuming the 12th rep is hitting failure. In other words, you could not do 13 if your life depended on it.
Right.
It is only those last 5 reps. And I'd say it's probably more like the last 3 or 4, but it doesn't matter. Yeah, that's why I say it's not bulletproof. It's just a way of thinking. It's only those last 5 reps of that set that are maximally stimulative.
Mm-hmm.
Because the first, let's say 7 or 8, there's not a huge effort level there, right? Around rep number 8 or 9, you have to start thinking a little bit. Okay, I'm going to have to put some ass into this movement to get it. Well, that mental part, that's what stimulates motor unit recruitment. Your ability to think, I have to squat this harder. I have to try harder. that enhances, that's more motor units in that. And then also the bar speed is going to slow. Rep number 12 is going to be far slower than rep number 1. Mm-hmm. And because that contracts, it's going to be very slow if it's actually to failure. And that those repetitions that have that very slow contractile velocity are the ones that are going to stimulate hypertrophy. So going back to your row thing, what muscles are doing the work in this row? And then when you fail, what is it that's failing? Where is the failure point coming from? If you're trying to use a row to develop your lats,
this is what I'm trying to understand. So
is it your erectors that are failing? If it is, then it's like doing deadlifts with a double overhand grip. Mm-hmm. Your grip failed far before anything else did, which means nothing else is going to get very much stimulus because the weakest link in your chain failed way before any of the other muscles were even remotely challenged, right?
Yes.
So if your row technique is shitty, which it is for most people.
It was for me.
Yeah, so maybe your erectors fail first. Your low back, you're set up in a way because you don't know good technique, or your erectors just aren't strong enough to handle a heavy weight for whatever reason, that your erectors and your low back will fail far before your lats ever approach failure, which is then going to make at least that version of whatever version of barbell row you're doing not a good exercise for hypertrophy because your target musculature, your lats, are failing way before that. If you're using a double overhand grip on a barbell row, your grip is going to fail way before your lats do. You can handle far more weight with straps than you can with a double overhand grip. And so guys will say, well, but I want to train my grip. Fair enough, but you're doing it at the expense of your lats. Mm-hmm. And you're using far less weight. Your grip is going to fail. You'll come off of that. Your forearms are going to have a massive pump. You won't feel shit in your back. Okay. Straps have, this is an aside, but straps on back movements. If you look at a lot of bodybuilders train, why are they using straps on a lat pull down when they don't need them? It's not because they can't do it. And it's not because they're lazy and they're pussies and all this stuff, which is what the internet will tell you. It's because by being able to relax the grip and relax the forearm, they're able to generate more into their lats. Okay. You don't have this, there's an interference effect from having these other muscles having to do a shitload of work.
Yes.
They can probably do more volume doing it that way as well because their forearms are not fatiguing. Mm-hmm. And most guys, when they start doing back training, if you start having them do like a dedicated back day, when they first start, if they don't have coaching and instruction on the lifts, most of them will get off a lat pull down machine or any type of row variant or whatever, and they've got a huge forearm pump and nothing else.
Yep.
It becomes forearm day, not back day.
Yeah.
Which is why guys use straps. It makes, especially if you're going to do multiple exercises for back, it's to save the forearm fatigue, but it's also because it's more stimulative to the lats to disengage the grip and disengage the forearms a bit to really ensure that the lats are the things that become the failure point in that lift. And so when you're doing barbell rows, it's very, very difficult to do barbell rows heavy without a little bit of cheat in there. The torso is going to move. But if you are using hip extension in place of scapular retraction and shoulder extension, you have to look, what is the function of the lat? Well, it really has like three, like its primary is shoulder extension. So the most pure lat movement in existence is a pullover. But second would be like a chin up or like a pull down, especially like a close grip, like here, or a V grip, or like the close mag grips. Things that are almost pure shoulder extension are going to be that's the primary role of the lat, is shoulder extension. But secondarily from that, and this is where the Pendlay row came from, and literally I feel like I didn't even know Glenn, but I feel like I'm the only person who has ever read his explanation of what a Pendlay row is. And literally nobody that does Pendlay rows now is doing it the way that Glenn described them in his written article. Maybe there's other sources that he has for them. I don't know, but I have read very detailed account of Glenn Pendlay talking about why he prescribed Pendlay rows and also how to do them in the correct technique. And there's three elements of that. Is that the lats, again, shoulder extension is their primary, but secondarily scapular retraction. That's not the primary role of the lats, and it's not the best way to train the lats, but they are involved in scapular retraction. But the other thing that they're involved in is spinal extension.
Yes.
And that is the one thing that people don't realize about the lats, is that they have a role in spinal extension, especially extension of the spine around the mid back. Not necessarily the very low back. That's going to be almost pure erector.
That's what I felt on that chest supported row.
When you get a few vertebrae up from that.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Where the lats attach low, they're involved in spinal extension. A Pendlay row, it's like the glute ham raise is designed to do what? Train both function of the hamstrings at once. It's training hip extension and knee flexion at once, right? A Pendlay row is designed to train all three functions of the lat in one movement. It's designed to train spinal extension, scapular retraction, and shoulder extension all in one rep. Nobody does it like that. It's all hip extension. So and some very small amounts of the other ones. And so a Pendlay row pulled from everybody thinks just a Pendlay row is a barbell row pulled from the floor.
That's what I
thought.
But
there's more to it than that. And what Glenn was talking about when he wanted it pulled from the floor, he used a terminology that I've only ever heard him use, which is dynamic arching. Okay, which is to start with the back in slight flexion and dynamically extend the spine, not the hips. Now, most people aren't going to be able to do that. They're too big of a motor moron to be able to do that. And in order to dynamically extend the spine while keeping the hips still. So dynamic spinal extension with scapular retraction. Why am I demonstrating this on video? I don't know, but it's what I'm doing with my hands. But dynamically extending the spine while it's a very short shoulder extension. The range of motion on a row for shoulder, the range of shoulder extension is very short.
So that's what I was looking at. Yeah.
Right. So it's not like if you want like full shoulder extension, you want something from overhead.
Okay.
Like a chin up, a pull down, a row pulled in, especially low on the body, is going to be pure or a very shortened piece. It's the short end of shoulder extension. So we talk about training muscles in their shortened versus lengthened phases, which I don't think really matters for most people. But what you're doing is you're training the lats in their shortened position. So there, and you're just doing like what they're almost fully contracted right there. But it's still powerful stimulus. So that's what a Pendlay row is those three elements all in place. The way guys do them now, though, is like maybe it's none of those three. I see them a lot of times. It's especially guys that go insanely heavy on it. And maybe it's not a bad exercise, but it's mostly hip extension. And that's not a role of the lats. That's not hit. So when your body, if your torso is starting here and you're opening up your hips like this in order to finish every rep, the bulk of that weight that's being moved is being moved by the hips. So if you just want to move some weight around, and maybe it has some carryover to the deadlift, to do them real sloppy like that. A lot of big deadlifters that do a lot of big heavy rows will tell you it helps them. I don't know, but what I will tell you is there's no argument to be made that a movement that is 80% hip extension is a really great lat exercise. I don't think so, because it's definitely not the limiting factor. And so the pendulum row thing was kind of an aside. So going back to your point of doing like a chest supported row, is a good way to take other muscles out of the lift that may be the limiting factor. Take your erectors out of it, right? And support yourself on a chest pad and then row that way, so that you can function, or you can perform the function of the muscles that you're trying to work. And you can perform those functions hard and with heavy weight without being limited by other exercises or by other muscles that you're not worried about training in that movement. The other thing I would say is people don't understand the position of the arm on rows. Okay. When I went on Dave Tate's podcast a year or two ago, we had a great conversation, and I wish it was one of these conversations that we had after the cameras went off, but we were talking about back training, and it would have been great content, but we had similar agreements. Is that, the West Side guys, they talked about training their back 4 days a week, right? They didn't train their lats 4 days a week. Okay. But not every row is the same, right? There's a type of row that you can do that trains almost zero lats. Okay. And there's a type of row that you can do that trains very little upper back. There's going to obviously be some overlap between the two, but the style of row that you do and the placement of your arms relative to your torso really determines whether that row is going to be a very lat focused movement, or whether it's going to be more of the upper back and the rear delts type of movement. So any type of row that you're going to do where you really want to target the upper back, the rear delts, the bottom of the traps, the teres groups, the rhomboids to some extent, and some lat, you're going to have the hands are going to be basically high and wide, and the resistance is going to be pulled in towards the chest. Okay. And so that would be like a chest supported T-bar row, that sort of thing. But the elbows are out away from the body, and that's not a lot of shoulder extension.
No.
Almost none, basically. What lat activation you're getting is from its secondary role in scapular retraction, but it's not a primary lat exercise. It's definitely a secondary contributor to the movement. But that type of row, and I see a lot of guys doing their barbell rows that way, where they bend over and they pull the bar up into their chest.
I've seen that, yes.
Which is making it into more of an upper back exercise. But that is a shitty, terrible upper back exercise, because now the bar is so far out in front of your body, that moment arm is so long, you could never possibly move any load that way. When you're pulling, if you're bent over all the way and you've got a barbell on the floor and you're rowing it into your chest, that moment arm is extremely long, and you're never going to row a very heavy weight. You can do far more resistance without the limiting factor of that moment arm of your lower back having that weight so far out in front of your hips. A chest supported movement is far better for that, because you're upright, you're laying down, whatever, and you're supported. And now just those muscles can do the work, and they're not limited by anything except themselves, which is what you want. And when you hit failure, it's not going to be because your lower back gave out. It's going to be because those muscles, those muscle fibers themselves, reached a contractile velocity of 0. And that's where the growth comes from. Now, so how do we row for the lats? The guy that first pointed this out from a biomechanical standpoint, that people, others did before him, but the first person that we would know is Dorian Yates. And that was his Yates row. And Dorian was very smart on muscle function.
Extremely.
He was the smartest of anybody in that generation in terms of being able to explain exactly why he did the exercises that he did and why he did them the way that he did. But the Yates row, so all these rows have names, right? You've got the Pendlay row, and then you've got the Yates row. Well, the Yates row is what? He's very upright, and he's pulling the weight into his lower abs, not into his chest, not into his upper abs. He's pulling the weight into his lower abs. And early in his career, before he blew out his bicep, he did it with a supine grip. And if you experiment with that, I don't program supine grip barbell rows because they're very dangerous to the bicep tendon.
I agree.
But when you have the elbows, as we talked about upper back with the elbows being high and wide, well, for a row for the lats, the elbows are going to be down and in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And now when you do that rowing position, what do we see? Shoulder extension.
More shoulder extension, yes.
Right. So the Yates row, where you're more bent over, you don't have a moment arm between the midfoot and the barbell. The barbell is going to be suspended over the midfoot, which is why Dorian can row 405. I can row quite a bit of weight. And I do more of a Yates style row than I do that. But why guys will ask me sometimes, and not that I'm flaunting my own strength because it's not impressive at all, but I can row 315 for a set of 8 to 10 pretty easily and get and not have any pressure on my low back. Mm-hmm. But I'm aware of the distance between that barbell and my midfoot, just like I would be with a basic barbell lift. And it's not that far out in front. Right. And so my erectors are not limited, are not the limiting factor. It's a very short range of motion for the lats, but it's because of the weights that are used. Mm-hmm. It's a very effective range of motion. But you don't have to do a barbell row. Any row that you do, a single arm dumbbell row, if you want to do the old, support with one hand and do a single arm dumbbell row, you're going to pull that dumbbell with the upper arm close to the torso and pull the weight down in towards the hip, not up here like that, which is most guys dumbbell row like this, up here like that. That's going to work a little lat, but mostly upper back. A good dumbbell row for the lats, that elbow is going to be down a little further and the weight is going to be pulled into the lower abs. Okay. Mm-hmm. And that's why you see guys when they do like the old, like the hammer strength, single arm, the hammer, it's similar to the Arsenal machine, right? With the dual arms on there. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So why do you see guys so often do that movement standing as opposed to actually using the seat? It's because they're trying to position their body. If you watch, they'll grab the top of the handle and they pull the top of the handle down into their hip. Yeah. They don't pull it in a straight line up here.
No.
They stand so they can pull the handle down into the hip, which that activates the lats. So they know what they're doing. If they wanted to work more of the upper back, they would sit upright on the chest, grab the pronate, the horizontal handles and pull here and work more of the upper back versus grabbing the top of the handle, keeping the elbow in and pulling down into the hip. Now you've got a very good lat exercise. And so fundamentally understanding muscle function is the key to really understanding how back training works. And that just grabbing a weight and rowing it without any thought into how you're rowing it. But if you look at Dorian's training, that his barbell rows, his Yates row was designed to target the lats specifically. Now, did he get he's rowing 405. So did he get a lot of erector stimulus? Sure. Did he get, some trap activation and some mid-back activation? Of course, but there was a lot of overlap there, but his target on that movement was the lat. And that's what he wanted. He switched later on to a double overhand grip instead of a supine grip because he tore his bicep. Mm-hmm. I've done them both ways and I've torn my bicep too in the past. So I don't use them, but if you want to play around with it and just grab, 95 pounds or 135 and do some kind of Yates style rows with a supine grip, about a shoulder width grip, and pull it low into your abs and really arch and then flex your lats hard at the top. Do about 10 or 15 reps. You will feel it far more than you do a regular barbell row, and the way that most people do a regular barbell row. And then you can turn that heavy, good free weight compound movement into a movement that actually produces a stimulus and a failure point for the muscles that you're trying to train. If that makes sense.
Makes perfect sense. That was
very hard to do a biomechanical lecture in a podcast.
We've probably lost like 75% of the audience here, but
there's 6 people on here.
I care about it because I have grievances with rows that you've cleared up here in this explanation. So my first one, and I think you can agree with this because we said this in the last one, is that a lot of novices or just guys that aren't strong are very concerned about how to row, and they probably don't need to spend time on it. I was one of these guys back in the day. I've always done the full range of motion, pull up, chin up, pull down because of swimming. I was a high school swimmer. They had us doing it very young, and I kept that in rotation always. So I understood how that lift worked. My lats would get wider from it. I got it. The row up and pre-starting strength, I didn't fucking get it on.
That's why I don't like rows for novices. I think the novice, their back training program needs to be chin ups and deadlifts. because those are classic point A to point B exercises.
Yeah.
Which is what they need. If you go into a full stretch at the bottom when you're doing your chin-ups and you feel the lat stretch, which they can do, and you pull yourself up chin over bar or chest to bar, the lat is going to work the way that you want it to do. The same is not true on a pull down. If you don't, a pull down is not a point A to point B exercise. And guys fuck it up very badly all the time. Mm-hmm. And so, but a chin is kind of dummy proof in a way. And a deadlift is really dummy proof. If you just do the mechanics correctly, you don't have to feel there's a difference between understanding proper lifting mechanics and establishing a mind muscle connection.
Yes.
There's overlap, but they're different.
Yes.
And the lifts that we teach to novices do not require a mind muscle connection.
They're not anywhere close to.
The closest you have to get to that is teaching people how to set their back before squatting. So the little thing we do in the seminars where Rip goes around and touches everybody's erectors and sees who can set their back and who can't.
Yes. That's
the closest we get to the importance of a mind-muscle connection in the strength training program that we do for novices, because you have to be able to use your brain to activate that muscle.
Yes.
Other than that, it's mechanical. It's go down to this point and come up. Mm-hmm. And if you do that, all of the right muscles will do their job, whether you feel them or not. And so that's a big part of the reason why we use those movements. You don't need to feel those muscles working in order for them to work. And that's different than for more advanced level bodybuilding or hypertrophy work, where a lot of these exercises, you do need to learn not just the mechanics of the lift, but what we call that mind-muscle connection. Is your brain connecting with that muscle, and are the mechanics in the right place so that the right muscle fibers are getting the bulk of the stimulus? Mm-hmm. And that's where these guys that come from a starting strength or a powerlifting background run into the bodybuilding trouble with the hypertrophy work, and because their rep execution is terrible. They just think, well, I just grab hold of this motherfucker and just start rowing it.
Right.
And sometimes they can move a lot of weight, but I watch a guy do a row and I'm like, at no point did his lats do any work. It was just body movement, hip extension, elbow flexion, whatever.
Yeah.
But there was you can watch the lats. I mean, that's all you have to do. Watch the muscle. It's not doing shit because his rep execution is so terrible. Or guys doing swinging pull downs. Mm-hmm. They're moving the cable from the top of the stack to their chest, but they're using every other muscle in their body other than their lats to do it. And they think, well, shit, I'm repping the whole stack for a set of 10, but why are my lats small? Because you're not using them.
Yep. So that was the second issue I had with rows. And a lot of this you explained it way better here than in other videos and things you posted up, because the dynamic thoracic extension, I was not connecting the lat with that. I understood that you had to do it. When you said it in the first podcast I did with you and Trent, and I tried to do it like on my own with a wide grip cable row, and I'm like, fuck, what the fuck? I couldn't figure it out, man. And then I started fucking with that Arsenal machine a few months back, and I was like, oh, this is what he's talking about,
Yeah.
So whenever I would hear you or other people talk about the lats on rows, I'm like, what the fuck are they talking? This is a partial. I'm like, you can't fucking get a full stretch. What are they talking about? And you just kind of hit it. You're like, no, not that function. You're like, you're acknowledging that it's a partial, but then you're like, there's other shit you're supposed to be doing that I definitely was not doing. And the limiting factor for me on rows is my forearms, my biceps, because I'm not using my lats enough. That's what I'm kind of learning here. Yeah.
Yeah. You're yanking on it with your arms. Yeah. And it's the old thing every bodybuilding coach in the world used to teach us this way of, just thinking of your hands as hooks, and I get people to do this all the time when I'm teaching them pulling exercises think of your hand as just a hook on there and then what I'll teach people to do is initiating the movement with their lats or their upper back. In other words, grab onto that handle on that row machine and keep your elbow straight. Now move it with just your lat. Mm-hmm. Initiate like that and then come through with the hand. It's very nuanced and it's very hard to teach for a motor moron. I don't know if you're a motor moron or not. But my guess is not. Although a lot of swimmers are, oddly enough, motor morons in the gym. But anyway, that's an aside. I trained a ton of swimmers, so
same.
but teaching somebody, so I had a guy that was kind of I don't want to say a mentor, but a teacher to me in the gym a long time ago. And you've probably seen people do this, which is um, like lat activations on a pull-up bar.
Yeah.
Like you hang from a pull-up bar
I've done it.
Don't bend your elbows. Just contract your lats and just move your body up and down, just with kind of rotating your scapula down like that. And what that is for is that's teaching you how to initiate the movement. How do you initiate the pull from the bottom of a pull down or a pull up or a row? So when you grab onto that handle on a row machine, most guys grab it and their first thought is, I'm going to yank on it with my hand. I'm going to pull with my hand. And so that engages the forearm and the bicep right from the beginning and a little less lat. Whereas if you can really teach yourself to pull from you'll hear all the bodybuilding coaches say that. Pull through your lats, pull through your lats, pull through your lats. What do they mean?
I didn't know what the fuck they were talking about.
That's what they mean. Is pull through your lats, don't pull with your hands. And that's where the straps come into play, is they help you to learn that technique of don't yank on the weight with your hands, pull through your lats. It's a very, very, very difficult thing to teach people. And it's not something that any novice needs to worry about. And it's not something that 99% of the general public that's training for health and fitness really needs to worry about that much either, because they're not really going to have the capacity to do it. It's a very nuanced thing and it's hard to teach, but to really maximize things, it's a necessary thing to learn, especially on back training. It's less important on basically every other muscle group. The hardest muscle group to teach people to train correctly from a hypertrophy standpoint by far is the back. I agree. It is the hardest one to learn, which is why novices and maybe even a lot of intermediates and stuff do better to just stick with like pull-ups and deadlifts and maybe some chest supported rows for scapular retraction, although deadlifts work quite a bit of that if you do them right. But some of these other movements they're I don't want to say they're like too nuanced to learn. That's not correct. But there is a lot to learning them, to really getting the most out of them. And this is why a lot of people shit on bodybuilding type training as being ineffective. It's just strictly they don't know how to do it. That's it. They don't know how to make it work.
It's kind of like Olympic lifts. It requires a lot of commitment, time, focus.
Yes. Yeah. But with back training, it's just difficult because with every other muscle group, there's exercises that you can do to maximally stimulate those muscles without really learning that mind muscle connection as much. Like if you want to do hamstrings, I mean, you can do a leg curl, which an idiot can do, and probably some sort of, heavy loaded hip, an RDL or something like that. Those two things. And that's kind of a point A to point B movement. I mean, it's good to be able to feel your hamstring stretch and stuff at the bottom, but if you have the right mechanics, it's just a point A to point B movement. And certainly a lot of your chest movements, your pressing exercises for your chest and your shoulders are point A to point B movements. A lot of heightened mind muscle connect, more so if you get into doing cable flies, lateral raises, things like that require some of that more nuanced thinking of how to actually feel the right muscles work. And like lateral raises, guys do them with, again, using every muscle in their body other than their side delts to do it. The best thing to do, like for lateral raises, to really learn how the side delt works is to learn on one of those lateral raise machines.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
I don't like them. I don't like those machines that much. Like the ones where the pad sits on your elbows.
Yep.
I don't really like them that much, but teaching people how a side delt raise works to get them to be able to use dumbbells or cables to do it, that's really effective, because most guys, when they do lateral raises, if you watch them, it goes back to their connection is with their hand on the weight. And they throw the weight up here. Oh, you can't really see, but they throw the weight up here, but their elbow is down by their side still. Yeah. Well, the point of a lateral raise, the medial delt, it abducts the humerus away from the body. And so to make it do its job, the humerus needs to be lifted away from the body, which means that elbow needs to be at least as high as the shoulder and probably 1 or 2 inches higher. And so your focus on that movement is your elbows. I tell my clients all the time when I start with them, when I teach them lateral raises, I start with no weight and I get behind them and I put my hands on their elbows. and I tell them to drive their elbows up against my hands. And I make them work against the light resistance of my hand pressure, pushing against my hands with their elbows. And then I put a little weight in their hand and I say, okay, now do that same thing with a little bit of weight and get your elbow up higher. Don't focus on your hand throwing the weight up. Mm-hmm. Focus on your elbow and your side delt lifting the humerus up away from your torso. Now that's a side delt movement. Okay. Upright rows is another one. That's a wide grip upright row. It's another exercise that gets shit on, but it's a great side delt movement. A wide grip upright row is a lateral raise with the barbell held in the hands. Mm-hmm. And people think of upright rows like this.
Yeah, that's how I was first saw it.
But a wide grip out here, think about it. What's it doing? It's that. Okay. But a wide grip, Dante talked about wide grip upright rows. A lateral raise can only be loaded so heavy. A wide grip upright row, in theory, can be loaded to infinity. You know, it's a great side delt movement, but almost nobody does it right. And they use hip extension to get it moving. They use their traps, which the traps are going to be involved some. But a wider grip upright row, if you've learned to do a lateral raise correctly, I'll put a barbell in their hand and I'll say, now do a lateral raise. So they've got their hands hooked on the bar and we're just thinking about driving the elbows up and away from the body with that barbell.
Shit, I want to try this now.
Hands. And you'll get an insane pump in the side delt from doing those. But again, if you're just thinking about, okay, I'm going to grab this bar and just start yanking it up to my chin, you're going to be, well, this hurts my shoulder and I don't feel it anywhere. This exercise sucks. You just don't know how to do it. And again, I'm not arguing that everybody needs to do these movements. I'm just trying to talk people through some of the nuanced differences between like deep in the weeds hypertrophy training and like strength training, strength building. It's kind of two different things.
Yeah. And back to the central point that nobody's going to hear because they've turned us off by now.
Oh yeah. Nobody's listening to this now.
The guy that comes in who is undertrained or detrained or is never trained is never going to need to do this shit. He's going to grow just fine pressing and deadlifting, Then that's what happened to me. Like I did all these fucking rows wrong, like you're talking about, and I'd look at my back and it would get wider from all the chin-ups and then nothing happened in the middle. And I'm like, what the fuck? I'm doing all these rows. And like I have a weak upper back. I have a weak rhomboid, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Then I saw Rip saying, fuck barbell rows, get your deadlift to 500. Then you can have your own opinion and you won't need mine. So I just took that to heart, bro. And then all that shit grew. I'm like, well, there you go. I'm like, I got rhomboids.
He's not wrong.
For who he's talking to, absolutely.
Yeah, and Rip is probably the best in our industry about knowing his audience and keeping on point with his message to his audience. Mm-hmm. I'm the worst about going off topic and talking about things that don't apply to the bulk of my audience, but I'm not as autistic as he is, so I'm not hyper focused on this one thing. So I can't just like, people are like, well, you don't talk about starting strength that much. And it's like, I talked about starting strength for like 15 years.
You co-authored the fucking program.
Like I can't, like I've said what I'm going to say about it. They're like, well, do you still, I still use it. I still use all the same principles. It's sometimes the exact programming that's in the books. But I've kind of said what I'm going to say about it. And I can't just keep talking about micro loading and eating more and all in 3 sets of 5. Like I can't just talk about that for the rest of my career. Like I'm interested in too many things. And they don't apply to the bulk of the people that I train, but they do apply to a lot of the people that I train now. And the more I talk about it, the more I get people that are coming to me that want this style of training. And it's a lot of fun for me to do it. So
see, I was in a whole different category than everybody else in that I'm more like our average client that wants to keep pushing it, but isn't competitive in any of these arenas. The thing I always tell people is competing in a sport or a pageant, the difference between that and what I do is deadlines. I don't have a deadline, but I'm still trying to add over time. Right. And I did it because I didn't want to look like shit, and I was trying to be healthy. But I would take that, our average client with those goals, and I'd turn that all the way up because I've been continuously setting PRs year after year for 13 years. And I have to explain to people these things because they look at me like, oh, you're not that big. Then I'm like, do you understand where I fucking started?
Yeah. It's all relative.
Yeah. And I look at these guys and I see them going through the same struggles I did, where they're reading these magazines. They don't have good genetics for this shit. And they're sitting there, well, my lateral raise, with their fucking 5 or 10 pound dumbbell, or they're swinging 15s maybe. Or, I need to do the row and it needs to be really strict and they're not deadlifting, And if they do deadlift, it's 165 the first day,
Right.
And I have to tell them, like, you got to do the barbell lifts. So I go, but, so-and-so, this, bodybuilder influencer guy said, no, I need the stretch and the mind-muscle connection and the lengthened partial. And I'm like, bro, you're not deadlifting. And if I have you deadlift today,
they're trying to read the organic chemistry book when they haven't taken biology 101.
But precisely. And that's
the best analogy.
And that's 99%.
It's not that the organic chemistry book is wrong or doesn't work, but the reason that they don't understand it, and the reason they can't operate, and the reason they're failing organic chemistry is because they didn't take biology 101 and chemistry 101 and master the foundations before they got into the more advanced topics. And I think that's I always go back to that analogy because I think it's it's not perfect, but it's the closest one.
It's pretty damn close, man.
Yeah. Because I think there's a lot of parallels there where if you don't have good mastery of the foundational subject matter, it's going to make it nearly impossible or just really, really hard to master the more advanced stuff, and I would make that argument. Like, that's why I don't think of, like, in the starting strength program, everybody says, well, we don't want to do the power clean. Okay, fine. You don't want to do the power clean. So what do we sub it with? And the answer for years was always barbell rows.
It's horrible.
But it's, if you have a 155 deadlift, you're going to be barbell rowing 75 pounds. It just doesn't have any stimulus, and the weight matters. It does. Absolutely. Yes, it's all relative, but it does. The weight that you're moving on exercises does matter. We talked about this in the last subject. It was like Jay Cutler saying, "Well, I never went heavy. Like, I didn't go heavy like Ronnie did. I trained in the 12 to 15 rep range, and it's like, but you're inclining 405 for 12 reps.
Yeah, 12.
Yeah, like that's so. Yeah, you are going heavy. You're not going 1 rep max heavy, but you are going heavy. Now, he's not the best.
He also said that when him and Ronnie did the exact same workout, Ronnie had more weight on the bar
with everything.
Yeah,
But also Jay Cutler said when Ronnie was on his way out and Jay Cutler was on his way up, but Jay Cutler was still losing to Ronnie Coleman. He's like, what do I need to do? I can't catch up to this guy. And so he started looking at Ronnie's training, and Ronnie Coleman's doing 495 barbell rows. He's doing 9-plate T-bar rows. He's doing 800-pound deadlifts. And he wasn't doing that stuff. And even as a super advanced guy, I mean, literally runner-up in the Mr. Olympia, even as a super advanced guy, he went back to the basics. He went back to heavy, he got away from the pumpy, squeezy cable stuff. He got away from a lot of that stuff and went back to deadlifting. He went back to squatting. He went back to a lot of those foundational movements and tried to, reclaim some strength on those. Higher rep ranges and all that, but he didn't have that. He didn't have that size that Ronnie Coleman had, and that's why I think even at that level, that literally number 1 and 2 in the world, the weight on the bar kind of mattered. You look at like that era of where I think that probably the best era of bodybuilding ever, which was Ronnie Coleman, Flex Wheeler, Chris Cormier, Jay Cutler,
Lee Priest,
Dexter Jackson, all those guys. Now, again, a lot of this stuff is genetic. Yes, of course. But nobody had better genetics than Flex Wheeler.
No.
And Flex Wheeler never beat Ronnie Coleman. The biggest deciding factor in most of those guys was Ronnie Coleman's back. When from the front, I think he was beatable. And even a lot of those guys were better. I'm not a bodybuilding judge, but I don't know all the criteria. But just from my look at it, it's a Flex Wheeler and some of these guys were almost better than him from the front. But when Ronnie Coleman turned around and everything from the back, the rear lat spread, the back double bi, all that kind of stuff, it was over because his level of detail and size that he had in the back was so much better than everyone else's when he was at his peak. And I always say, is that genetic? Well, sure, it's a genetically strong body part for him. But who else was deadlifting 800 pounds for reps?
Right.
Now, did he do that all the time? I don't think so. I mean, that was like for a filming, but he did a lot of very heavy deadlifts very often.
He sure did.
495 barbell rows, T-bar rows with 9 plates on the end of with the thing extender with 9 plates on the end, all that kind of stuff that he was doing that those other guys weren't doing. And and even from the front, 495 on the bench for a set of 8, that kind of stuff, under continuous tension, never locking out that kind of stuff. People don't realize how freaking strong that is. 585 front squats for sets of 6, never locking out, keeping the quads under tension the entire time. I don't even know whether that's good or bad, but it's really hard to do that. And people don't appreciate how much stronger he was than them. And these are the elite of the elite. So it's like so how does that apply to the guy that we're talking to? Well, the weight on the bar matters.
Absolutely.
If it matters between number 1 and 2 at Mr. Olympia, it matters for 45-year-old Bill from accounting. If he wants to grow, he's got to get stronger and not worry too much about all this other stuff that I was just talking about earlier in the video. It still goes back to you have to get stronger on the basics, and even on the non-basics, it still goes back to getting stronger on those movements. Once you learn the technique, the bodybuilding hypertrophy side is still all about, even though it's not a performance-based sport, it's still all about performance. I mean, you're not going to, it's like I was saying, if you're squatting 315 for 5 today, and a year from now, you're still squatting 315 for 5, you're not going to grow. If you're barbell rowing 135 for 10 today, and a year from now you're barbell rowing 135 for 10, you're not going to grow. Like you have to, the performance metrics have to go up all the time. So it's still performance based even when it's not.
The performance just happens in the training, not on the stage.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, I think we've hammered.
Should we say bye to both of our listeners?
I think so. I think we might have one left.
Yeah.
Maybe it's Trent.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think I want to do the next one on lifting like heavy, singles, doubles, and triples,
Yeah, back to the pure strength training stuff.
Yeah, because we're not going 4 hours tonight, man. We're not Joe Rogan.
No.
But my mind started going there, so I have an idea for the next one. I think it'll be good.
Cool.
But I think we hammered that to high hell. I want to use most of it, even though we're going to lose, most of the people after the first hour.
Yeah, that's all right.
Yeah. But this one will be on YouTube as well, so we'll get some video. But
cool.
I'll close out. So let everybody know where to find you.
Best place, just go to my main website, which is just andybaker.com. So if you want, one-on-one online coaching, find it there. If you want templated programs, if you want online group coaching. So basically everything that I do, I still have a blog there. We were just talking about the bullshit of social media before we came on air and, the struggles with getting your message out there. I still have a blog that I somewhat maintain, but, it's got 10, 15 years worth of articles on there, this kind of stuff. It's got links to my podcast, which I haven't done a new episode in a year, but there's still a lot of good episodes on there. So anything you want, from my perspective, just andybaker.com.
All right. And you can find me at weightsandplates.com, where I offer online coaching primarily. I also still have a gym here in Phoenix, Weights and Plates Gym, just south of Sky Harbor Airport. Most of my short form content pops up on Instagram at _Robert_Santana. We're also on YouTube, and if you liked what you saw today, please smash that subscribe button, as they say. We're at youtube.com/@weights_and_plates. And I think those are all the places that you can find me. Now I'm fucking cooked, so I will see you all next time.